My name is David Lewin, or at least it was before I became a number. I'm going to show you something. This mark on my arm, see it? A7294. That's what they called me for 3 years. Not David, not son, not brother. A number. I was 20 years old when I entered Auschwitz. I was 23 when I walked out. But those 3 years took a lifetime. Maybe more than a lifetime. Maybe they took something that can't be measured in years at all. I'm 98 years old now. I've lived in 5 countries. I've had a wife, children, grandchildren. I've built furniture with these hands for 75 years. Good furniture, solid furniture, the kind that lasts. But for most of my life, I didn't talk about those 3 years. I couldn't. Every time I tried, the words would stick in my throat like broken glass. So I stayed quiet. I worked. I lived. I pretended the number on my arm was just a scar from an accident nobody needed to know about it. Until my grandson asked me about it. He was 8 years old. We were at a family dinner. He pointed at my arm and said, "Grandpa, what are those numbers?" And I realized I couldn't stay silent anymore. Because if I died without telling what happened, then everyone I tried to save, everyone whose name I memorized, everyone who trusted me with their last words, they'd be forgotten twice. Once in the camp and once in my silence. So this is me breaking 70 years of silence. This is me telling you what I did inside Auschwitz. Not the horrors, you already know about those. But the other things, the small things, the things I've never told anyone because they felt too small to matter, except they weren't small. Sometimes a small act is the only thing standing between a person and death. Sometimes a moment of compassion in hell is worth more than a lifetime of comfort and peace. I didn't save thousands of people. I'm not a hero in that way, but I saved moments. And sometimes a moment is enough to keep someone alive until tomorrow. Let me take you back. 1922, Cracóvia, Poland. I was born into a world that doesn't exist anymore. A world where Jewish families lived and worked and raised their children and thought they had a future. My father was a master carpenter, Samuel Lewin. He could look at a piece of wood and see what it wanted to become. Not what he wanted to make from it, but what it already was, waiting to be revealed. He taught me that. He taught me to listen to the wood. We had a small shop in the Jewish quarter, my father, me, and sometimes my uncle. We made furniture for weddings, cabinets for new homes, toys for children. Simple work, honest work, the kind where you go to bed tired and wake up proud. I had 2 younger sisters. Rachel was 17, Sarah was 14. Rachel wanted to be a teacher. Sarah wanted to be a singer. She had a voice that could make you cry just from hearing her hum while doing dishes. And I played violin, not professionally, but well enough. My mother's father had been a musician, and she made sure I learned. Every Friday evening before Shabbat, I'd play. My father would close his eyes, and my mother would smile, and my sisters would dance, and I thought that was what life was. Music and family and wood shavings on my clothes and my father's hand on my shoulder telling me I'd done good work that day. I had dreams. I wanted to open my own shop one day, maybe expand into different cities, maybe teach young boys the way my father taught me. I was 20 years old, and I thought I had time for all of it. Then 1939 came. The Germans invaded, and slowly, gradually, like water rising in a room you can't escape, everything changed. First it was small things, signs on shops, rules about where we could walk. My father's shop was marked with yellow paint. Some of his regular customers stopped coming, not all of them, but enough that we noticed. Then it was bigger things, curfews, restrictions, forced labor. My father had to report to work details, breaking his back doing construction for the occupiers instead of doing the craft he'd spent 40 years mastering. By 1941, they'd forced us into the ghetto. Thousands of families crushed into a few blocks. Our shop was outside the ghetto walls. We lost it. We lost everything except what we could carry. We lived in 2 rooms with another family, 8 people, no privacy, barely any food. My father aged 10 years and 6 months. He'd sit by the window and stare at his hands, these beautiful carpenter's hands, and they'd shake because he couldn't do the work he was built for anymore. Rachel tried to keep teaching children in secret. Sarah stopped singing. I stopped playing violin because I'd had to sell it for food 3 months after we moved to the ghetto. We told ourselves it was temporary. We told ourselves the war would end and we'd go back to normal. We told ourselves lies because the truth was unbearable. March 1942. That's when they liquidated our section of the ghetto. Liquidated, that's the word they used, like we were assets being disposed of, like we were inventory that didn't fit in the warehouse anymore. SS soldiers came through at dawn, shouting, dogs barking, rifle shots in the distance. They herded us into the streets, thousands of us. Old people, children, families with their belongings in sacks and suitcases, thinking maybe we were just being relocated. They marched us to the train station, cattle cars, wooden cars meant for animals, packed so tight you couldn't sit down, couldn't breathe properly, couldn't think. My father held onto my arm. My mother held my sisters. We were together. That's what mattered. Whatever happened, we'd be together. The train ride took 2 days, or maybe 3. Time stopped meaning anything in that darkness. People died standing up because there was no room for them to fall. Children cried until they couldn't cry anymore. My sister Sarah kept humming, so quietly I could barely hear it, the same melody over and over like a prayer. When the doors opened, the light was blinding. We stumbled out onto a platform, guards screaming in German, dogs. The smell of something burning that I couldn't identify, but that made my stomach turn. They separated us immediately. Men one direction, women another. I tried to hold on to my mother. A guard hit me with a rifle butt. My father grabbed me, pulled me into the men's line. I looked back. My mother had her arms around both my sisters. She was looking at me. She wasn't crying. She was just looking at me like she was trying to memorize my face. That was the last time I saw them. My mother, Rachel, Sarah. I never found out what happened to them. Not specifically, but I know. We all know. They made us strip, shaved our heads, gave us prison uniforms that didn't fit, tattooed numbers on our arms. Mine was A7294. The needle felt like it was injecting something more than ink, like it was injecting the understanding that I wasn't a person anymore. Then came the selection. An SS doctor, clean uniform, bored expression, pointing left or right as we filed past. Left meant work, right meant the gas chambers, though we didn't know that yet. My father was 48 years old. He'd worked construction for 6 months in the ghetto, breaking his body. He looked 60. The doctor looked at him for maybe 2 seconds, pointed right. I tried to follow him. The guard shoved me left. I watched my father walk away with a group of old men and young children. He looked back once, just once, and then he was gone. I was 20 years old. I'd just lost my entire family in 10 minutes, and I was standing in a place that smelled like death and chemicals and despair, being yelled at in a language I barely understood, wearing clothes that belonged to someone who'd probably died in them. And all I could think was, I need to remember their names. I need to remember what my father's hands looked like. I need to remember Sarah's voice. I need to remember. Because if I forget, then they're really gone. They put us in barracks, wooden buildings, rows of 3-level beds with no mattresses. Hundreds of men crammed into spaces meant for maybe 50. The smell was indescribable. Human waste and sickness and terror. That first night I didn't sleep. I lay on wooden slats and whispered my name over and over. I am David Lewin. I am David Lewin, son of Samuel, brother of Rachel and Sarah. I am David Lewin. Because I'd already noticed. The guards didn't use names, they used numbers. And I understood that was intentional. If you forget your name, you forget you're human. And if you forget you're human, you stop fighting to survive. The work was brutal. They assigned me to a construction detail, moving rocks, digging ditches, building structures I didn't understand the purpose of. 12-hour days, no breaks. One meal of watery soup with maybe a potato in it if you were lucky. Bread so hard it hurt your teeth, water that tasted like rust. Men died every day from exhaustion, from beatings, from random executions because a guard was bored or angry, or just wanted to remind us we were disposable. Bodies piled up and other prisoners had to carry them away. I lasted 3 weeks in construction before I collapsed. Just fell down in the middle of the work site, couldn't get up, couldn't breathe. I thought that was it. Thought I'd survived losing my family just to die of exhaustion before I'd even been there a month. A guard walked over. I waited for the bullet. Instead, he asked in broken Polish if I had any skills. I don't know why he asked. Maybe he needed to fill a quota. Maybe he was bored. Maybe some small part of him was still human. I said I was a carpenter. He pulled me up, sent me to a different area, the maintenance shop. That decision saved my life. Not because the work was easier, it wasn't much easier, but because it moved me indoors, away from the worst weather, away from the most brutal guards, and because it gave me access to something precious, small pieces of wood. I worked on repairs, fixing bunks, building shelves for the storage buildings, maintaining the infrastructure of the camp. It was grotesque, using my father's skills to maintain the place that murdered him. But I did it because the alternative was death. And slowly, I started to notice things, opportunities, not for escape, not yet, but for small acts of resistance that no one would notice. There was a boy, I don't know his real name. He told me he was 17, but I could see he was maybe 14. Thin as a ghost, terrified eyes. He'd been put in my work detail and he was failing. Couldn't lift the heavy timber, couldn't keep up. I knew what happened to boys who couldn't keep up, so I taught him how to survive, not with words. We couldn't talk openly, but with demonstrations. I showed him how to look busy while barely working, how to position himself so the guards couldn't see his face clearly and judge his age, how to walk slightly hunched so he looked older and beaten down instead of young and useless. I found a piece of charcoal one day. I rubbed it on his face before formations, made him look dirty and aged and harder. The guards never looked closely at individuals. They looked at groups, and if you could blend into the group, you could survive another day. He made it through 3 selections over the next 6 months. I don't know what happened to him after that. We got separated. But for 6 months he was alive because I taught him how to pretend to be older than he was. There was another boy a few months later. Different block, same situation. I did the same thing. Taught him the survival tricks, smudged his face, whispered advice when I could. 2 boys, out of thousands who didn't make it. 2 boys who maybe, possibly, survived, because a carpenter knew how to make things look like something they weren't. It felt like nothing. It felt like drops of water in an ocean of death. But I remembered what my father used to say. Every piece of furniture starts with 1 cut. You can't build the whole thing at once. You just make 1 cut, then another, then another. So I made my cuts, small ones, quiet ones, the kind that wouldn't get me killed but might keep someone else alive. There was a man named Aaron. I never learned his last name. He was from Hungary, maybe 40 years old. He'd gotten an infection in his foot. They'd cut off 3 toes to stop it from spreading. But that left him with a limp, and a limp meant you were useless, and useless meant selection. They'd given him a crutch, standard issue, rough wood, badly balanced, and it made noise when he walked. That hollow thump of wood on concrete. Every step announced he was injured. Every step called attention to his weakness. I watched him struggle for 2 days, watched guards notice him, watched him get marked during a formation, one of those mental notes guards made when they were deciding who to pull for the next selection. I couldn't let that happen. I stole wood from the shop, not big pieces, small scraps that no one would miss. Over 3 days, I built him a better crutch, measured it to his height, patted the top so it wouldn't dig into his armpit. Most importantly, I wrapped the bottom in layers of cloth I'd stolen from a storage room, made it silent. I gave it to him after a formation, just walked up, handed it to him, walked away. Didn't say a word. Couldn't risk being seen talking to him more than necessary. He used it for 8 months. I'd see him in formation sometimes, standing straighter, moving more confidently, the silence of his steps making him invisible. He passed 3 selections. 3 times the guards walked by him and didn't pull him aside because he didn't look weak anymore. He looked like everyone else. I don't know if he survived the war, but he survived those 8 months. And sometimes 8 months is everything. There was an old man, a professor, someone told me. He taught mathematics before the war. He had terrible vision, nearly blind without his glasses, which of course had been taken immediately. He couldn't see the guards coming, couldn't see obstacles in the work area, couldn't navigate the camp without help. And helping him was dangerous. Being associated with weakness could get you killed too. But I couldn't watch him stumble and fall and wait for the inevitable. So I developed a system. During formations, I'd stand near him, not next to him, that would be obvious, but near enough that I could give him signals. A light pressure on his arm meant turn right. 2 pressures meant turn left. A squeeze meant stop immediately. During work, I'd whisper commands. So quietly, it was almost just breath. Step up. Beam ahead. Guard left. Just enough for him to avoid the worst mistakes. It was exhausting. It meant I had to be constantly aware, not just of my own survival, but of his. It meant I had to be in the right place at the right time every single day. I did it for 4 months, until one morning, he wasn't at formation. I never found out what happened. Maybe he got sick. Maybe he made a mistake when I wasn't there to help him. Maybe they selected him for reasons that had nothing to do with his vision. But for 4 months, he had eyes. And maybe that meant he got to see 4 more months of sunrise. Maybe that meant something. The acts I'm describing, they sound heroic when I tell them now. But they didn't feel heroic. They felt desperate. They felt small. They felt like throwing teaspoons of water at a forest fire. But here's what I learned. In hell, a teaspoon of water matters. When everything is designed to destroy your humanity, to reduce you to an animal concerned only with your own survival, every act of compassion is resistance. Every moment you choose someone else's life over your own comfort is a victory against the machine trying to turn you into a monster. The winter of 1943 was the worst. Temperatures far below freezing. Our uniforms were thin. We had no coats, no extra blankets. Men froze to death in their sleep. Just didn't wake up in the morning, their bodies rigid and blue. I worked in the maintenance shop, which had a small stove. Not for our comfort, for keeping glue liquid and making metalwork possible, but it produced heat. There were men in my block who were dying, not from specific illnesses, just from cold and hunger and exhaustion combining into a slow shutdown of the body. You could see it in their eyes. That empty look that meant they'd stopped fighting. I started bringing them inside. Not obviously. The shop had a back area where we stored materials. I'd tell the capo in charge of my detail that I needed help moving timber. He didn't care as long as work got done, so I'd bring in the weakest men from my block, have them help me with projects that didn't need help, and let them stand near the stove for an hour or 2. They'd thaw out. The color would come back to their faces, their hands would stop shaking, and they'd go back to their blocks with just enough warmth in their bodies to survive another night. I couldn't save them all. I couldn't even save most of them. But I saved the ones I could reach. 3 or 4 men a day. Rotated them so no one person came too often and attracted attention. Gave them an hour of warmth in a winter designed to kill them. Some of them survived until spring. I know because I saw them in formations later, looking slightly less dead, and they'd catch my eye and nod. Just a small nod, an acknowledgement, a thank you that couldn't be spoken aloud. But the most dangerous thing I ever did, the thing that still makes my hands shake when I think about it, happened in the fall of 1944. There was a selection, one of many. They'd line us up, and an SS doctor would walk down the line, pointing left or right. Left meant you lived another day. Right meant the gas chambers. There was a boy, maybe 12 years old. I don't know how he'd survived that long. He shouldn't have been in the camp at all. Children that young were killed immediately upon arrival. But somehow he'd slipped through. Maybe he'd lied about his age. Maybe someone had hidden him. Maybe he'd just been lucky until that moment. He was in the line ahead of me, and when the doctor approached, the boy panicked, started crying, begging, and I knew instantly that he'd just killed himself. Weakness meant death. Emotion meant weakness. The doctor pointed right, but there was confusion in the line. People shifting, guards yelling, and in that chaos, maybe 5 seconds of chaos, I made a decision that should have killed both of us. I pulled the boy out of the right line and shoved him behind me toward the left. Then I stepped into his place in the right line, just for a second, just long enough for the guards to lose track of where he'd been. Then I moved back left. It was maybe 10 seconds total. But if anyone had noticed, if any guard had seen me switching lines, we'd both have been shot immediately. Not gassed, shot. They didn't tolerate that kind of defiance. No one saw, or if they saw, they didn't care enough to stop the selection. The boy moved with the left group. I moved with the left group. The right group marched away. I never spoke to him, never saw him again. Don't know his name. Don't know if he survived past that day or died the next week. But for those 10 seconds, I gave him a chance. And in Auschwitz, a chance was everything. I'm crying now. I'm sorry. I don't usually cry when I tell these stories. But that boy, whoever he was, he's the one that haunts me most. Because I don't know if I saved him or just prolonged his suffering. I don't know if giving him extra days in hell was an act of kindness or cruelty. But I couldn't do nothing. I've never been able to do nothing. The food situation was constant torture. We were starving, literally starving. Our daily ration was maybe 800 calories. We were burning 3,000 with the labor. Our bodies were consuming themselves. You could see men shrinking day by day, skin stretching over bones, eyes sinking into skulls. The bread ration was about 6 ounces per day, one small piece, that was all. Men would fight over crumbs, would steal from each other, would become animals because hunger makes you animal. I made a different choice. Every day I took my bread ration and I broke it into smaller pieces, kept half for myself, divided the rest into 4 or 5 tiny portions. Then, throughout the day, I'd find reasons to pass by certain men, the weakest ones, the ones whose hands shook so badly they could barely hold their soup bowls, the ones who'd stopped talking because talking took energy they didn't have. I'd drop a piece of bread near them, make it look accidental, never make eye contact, never acknowledge what I'd done, because if anyone thought I was giving away food, they'd kill me for it or demand I give it to them instead. Those tiny pieces of bread probably didn't save anyone's life by themselves, but I told myself they helped. Maybe they gave someone just enough energy to make it through one more work shift. Maybe they meant one more day of survival. And for me, they meant something else. They meant I could go to sleep knowing I'd eaten less than my ration and was therefore eating less than I needed to survive, but that I'd done it by choice, that I'd chosen compassion over survival. Because the Germans wanted to turn us into animals, wanted us to fight each other for scraps, wanted us to prove their theory that we were subhuman. And every time I gave away food I needed, I was proving them wrong. I was staying human. I was making a choice that an animal wouldn't make. I told myself if I eat all my bread and survive but become the kind of person who can watch others starve, then I've died anyway. I've died inside. And dying inside is worse than dying in body, because when you die inside, you can't come back. There was another thing I did that sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud, but it mattered to me. I memorized people, their names, their stories, where they were from, what they did before the war, who they loved, older men especially. They knew they probably wouldn't survive. They'd tell me about their families, their children, their wives, their work, and I'd listen and I'd repeat it back to myself every night before sleep, like a prayer, like a rosary made of other people's memories. Abraham Steinberg, tailor from Warsaw, 3 daughters, eldest named Miriam, used to sing in the synagogue choir. Joseph Katz, butcher from Lodz, wife Hannah, son David, made the best kishki in the neighborhood. Names and facts and tiny details that meant nothing to anyone but everything to them. I did this because I thought, if I survive, I can find their families. I can tell them their father talked about them every day. I can tell them they were loved. I can give them that. And after the war I spent 2 years traveling around Poland and Hungary and Germany, finding survivors, asking if they knew these names. And when I found someone, when I found a daughter or a nephew or a cousin, I'd sit with them and tell them everything I remembered. Your father told me about the time you learned to ride a bicycle. He said you fell 17 times but kept getting back on. He said you were the most stubborn child he'd ever met, and he'd never been more proud. I gave them back their dead, not the bodies, the memories, the love, the evidence that their father had remained human until the end, that his last thoughts were of them. Some of them cried, some of them hugged me, some of them accused me of lying, of inventing stories to make them feel better, but I wasn't lying. I'd carried those memories for years. They were real, they were sacred, they were my resistance. In the maintenance shop with my stolen scraps of wood, I built something I've never told anyone about until now. I built a small violin, maybe 10 inches long, made from pieces I'd collected over months, a scrap of maple from a demolished bunk, a piece of spruce from a shipping crate, tiny bits of metal wire I'd found and saved, glue I'd stolen drop by drop. It took me 4 months. I worked on it in moments when no one was watching, hid it in a gap in the wall, moved it carefully, terrified someone would find it, and I'd be beaten to death for wasting materials. It was ridiculous. It was stupid. It didn't help anyone survive. It didn't feed anyone or warm anyone or save anyone from selections. It was just a tiny, useless violin that didn't even have strings because I couldn't find strings. But I needed to build it. I needed to prove to myself that I still remembered how to create something, that my hands still knew how to do something other than destroy and repair, that somewhere inside me, the person I'd been before the war still existed. I never played it, couldn't play it without strings, but I'd hold it sometimes. In the dark of the barracks when everyone was asleep, I'd hold this tiny violin and remember my mother's smile when I played on Friday evenings. Remember Sarah's voice singing along. Remember being human. I left it behind when we were evacuated. Had to. Couldn't carry anything. But I like to think someone found it. Maybe another prisoner. Maybe after liberation. And I hope they understood what it meant. That someone in hell had taken the time to build a violin. That someone had chosen beauty over survival for just a moment. Because that's what it was really about. All of it. The children I aged. The crutch for Aaron. The professor I guided, the bread I shared, the names I memorized, the violin I built. It was about refusing to let them take my humanity. They could take my family, my freedom, my name, my health, my future, but they couldn't take my choice. Every day, I chose compassion. I chose to help. I chose to create instead of only destroying. I chose to be human. And that choice, that daily choice to be human in hell, is the only reason I'm sitting here today, able to tell you this story. January 1945. The Russians were coming. We could hear artillery in the distance. The Germans knew they were losing. They knew what would happen when the camps were discovered. So they decided to evacuate. They marched us out, thousands of us, in the middle of winter, no proper clothes, no food. Just march west, away from the advancing Soviet army. It was called an evacuation. Really, it was a death march. They were trying to kill as many of us as possible before the Allies found evidence of what they'd done. We marched for days. People fell constantly. Exhaustion, cold, starvation. Guards shot anyone who couldn't keep walking. The road behind us was lined with bodies in the snow. I was 23 years old and weighed maybe 90 pounds. I'd survived 2.5 years in Auschwitz, but I was going to die on a road in Poland because I was too weak to walk anymore. On the third night, there was chaos. Allied bombers overhead, not targeting us specifically, targeting supply lines nearby. But the bombs lit up the sky and created panic, guards shouting, prisoners running in different directions, confusion in the darkness. I made a decision. I stepped off the road, walked into the snow-covered forest, expected to hear a gunshot, expected to die in the next 5 seconds. No gunshot came. I walked maybe 50 feet, couldn't walk further, fell into a ditch filled with snow, other bodies there, dead prisoners from earlier in the march. I lay down among them, pulled snow over myself, tried to slow my breathing, tried to look dead. I heard guards calling to each other, heard them shooting prisoners they found hiding, heard boots crunching in snow getting closer. A guard walked past the ditch, shined a light down. I held my breath, didn't move, not even my eyes. Lay there among corpses, pretending to be one more corpse in a war filled with corpses. The light moved away, the boots walked away. And I lay there for hours. Maybe I passed out. Maybe I slept. Maybe I just waited to die, because even if I'd escaped the march, I was going to freeze to death in that ditch. I woke up to daylight. No guards, no sounds of marching, just silence and snow and cold so intense I couldn't feel my hands. I tried to move, could barely stand, stumbled out of the forest, walked without direction, just walked because staying still meant death. I found a farm. Small building, smoke from a chimney. I should have been terrified, should have assumed they'd turn me in or shoot me themselves. But I was past fear, past caring. I just walked to the door and collapsed. A man found me, Polish farmer, I don't remember his name. He should have let me die or called authorities. Hiding a Jew was a death sentence for his whole family, but he didn't. He dragged me inside. His wife gave me soup. They hid me in their barn. I stayed there 3 weeks, until Soviet soldiers arrived, until the Germans retreated and it was safe for me to be seen. That farmer risked everything for a skeleton of a stranger. I don't know why. Maybe he was just a good person. Maybe he'd seen too much death and couldn't add to it. Maybe he believed God would judge him for what he did when he had the chance to save someone. I never saw him again after the war. I tried to find him years later. Couldn't. I hope he survived. I hope he lived a long life knowing he saved one person when millions were being killed. Liberation didn't feel like freedom. That's what people don't understand. When the war ended, when the camps were opened, everyone expected us to celebrate, to be joyful, to be grateful. But I wasn't any of those things. I was hollow. I was empty. I'd survived, but I had no family, no home, no purpose. Everyone I loved was dead. Everything I'd known was destroyed. I couldn't talk for weeks, not because of physical injury, because I didn't have words. How do you tell someone what you saw? How do you explain what it felt like to watch your father walk to his death? How do you describe building a crutch for a man so guards wouldn't notice his limp? How do you communicate something so far outside normal human experience that language fails? So I stayed silent. I went through the refugee processes. I was examined, registered, processed. They sent me to a displaced persons camp, thousands of survivors all trying to figure out what life meant now. I wandered for months, literally wandered, traveled through Poland looking for any surviving family, found no one. Every address I went to, either the building was destroyed or someone else lived there now, or neighbors told me everyone from that family was dead. I carried a list of names, the ones I'd memorized from Auschwitz, the men who'd told me about their families. I went looking for their relatives. When I found someone, a cousin, a niece, a neighbor who'd known them, I'd sit with them and tell them everything I remembered. Your Uncle Samuel, he told me about your wedding. He said it was the most beautiful ceremony he'd ever seen. He said you married a doctor and he was so proud. He wanted you to know he thought about you every day. Sometimes they believed me. Sometimes they thought I was lying or crazy, but I kept doing it because I'd promised to remember. And those memories were all that was left of those men. I eventually settled in Sweden, Sarah. Got papers, started working again. Carpentry, the only thing I knew how to do. Built furniture for people starting over after the war. Got a job in a workshop. Married a woman named Ava, who'd also survived, though from a different camp. Had children. I didn't talk about Auschwitz, not for 50 years. My wife knew I'd been there. My children knew I had a number on my arm. But I didn't tell stories, didn't explain, couldn't. I worked, I lived, I tried to be normal. But I wasn't normal. I'd wake up at night having panic attacks, see my father's face, hear Sarah's humming, smell that smell from the camp that never fully left my nose no matter how many years passed. I'd go to the workshop and build tables and chairs and cabinets, put all my focus into the work, into making things that would last, into creating instead of destroying. And every piece of furniture I finished, I'd say a silent prayer for my father who taught me the craft. I made kikshoins, coffins for our local community. When someone died, I'd build their coffin, good wood, proper construction, respectful work. And if the family couldn't afford to pay, I never charged them. Never mentioned payment, just delivered the coffin and walked away. Because I'd seen too many bodies thrown into mass graves, too many people who died without dignity, without respect, without anyone to mourn them properly. So when I had the chance to give someone a proper burial, I did, free of charge, always. My children grew up, had their own children, and my grandson, when he was 8 years old, asked about the number. We were at a family dinner, loud, happy, normal, and he pointed at my arm and said, "Grandpa, what are those numbers?" Everyone went quiet. My daughter looked panicked. My wife started to redirect him. But I looked at this little boy, 8 years old, born into a world of peace and safety, and I realized I couldn't stay silent anymore. If I died without telling what happened, then everyone I tried to save, everyone whose name I memorized, everyone who trusted me with their stories, they'd be forgotten.
The wood
twice
already
dead,
was.
once in the camps and once in my silence. So I told him not everything. He was too young for everything. But I told him what the numbers meant, why I had them, where I'd been. And then slowly I started telling others, first at my grandson's school, then at community centers, then at universities. I became one of those survivors who speaks publicly, who testifies, who refuses to let people forget. I testified at war crimes trials, identified guards, described what I saw, answered questions from lawyers who'd never experienced anything close to what they were asking about. It was exhausting, painful, like reopening wounds that had barely healed. But I did it because I'd promised. 70 years earlier, lying in that barracks, whispering my name so I wouldn't forget who I was, I'd promised my father I would tell what happened. I'd promised I'd be a witness, so I witnessed. I spoke. I remembered. Now I'm 98 years old. Most of the people I knew in Auschwitz are dead. Most of the survivors are gone. Soon there won't be anyone left who was actually there. Soon it'll just be history books and documentaries and people arguing on the internet about whether it really happened. That's why I'm telling you this now, not just the horrors. You know about those. But the other things, the small acts of resistance, the moments of compassion, the ways we stayed human when everything was designed to make us animals. Because that's the real story. Not that we were victims. We were. But that's not all we were. We were also people who chose, every single day, to help each other, to share bread we needed ourselves, to build crutches and memorize names and risk our lives for strangers. We weren't saints. We weren't heroes. We were just people trying to survive while holding on to our humanity. And sometimes that meant giving away food. Sometimes it meant hiding a child. Sometimes it meant building a useless violin just to remember we could create. The number on my arm, A7294, it's not who I am. It's what they tried to make me. But I'm still David Lewin, son of Samuel the carpenter, brother of Rachel and Sarah, the man who played violin on Friday nights, the man who built furniture that lasts, the man who chose compassion in hell. I didn't save thousands. I saved moments, small moments, a crutch that was quiet, a piece of bread smaller than your thumb, an hour near a stove, a whispered command so a blind man didn't trip, 10 seconds of chaos where a child moved from one line to another. Those moments probably seem meaningless to you, drops in an ocean of death. But to the people in those moments, they were everything. They were the difference between dying today and living until tomorrow. And tomorrow was another chance, another sunrise, another possibility. So that's my story. That's what I did in Auschwitz. Not just survived, not just endured. I helped in the smallest ways, in the only ways I could. And if you take anything from this, take this. You always have a choice. Even in hell, even when everything is designed to make you selfish and cruel and inhuman, you can still choose compassion. You can still choose to help. You can still choose to stay human. It might not save the world. It might only save a moment. But sometimes a moment is enough. My name is David Lewin. I am 98 years old, and I will never forget